change on the west side, so it's going to be a great presentation. I'm Todd Godowski. I'm the president of the Los Angeles City Historical Society. We hope you enjoy this event today. I just want to do one little bit of organization business. We have our annual membership meeting coming up on September 8th. This is an administrative meeting. You know, it's not a tour, not particularly a fun meeting, but at least once a year to our monthly board meeting, we want to invite the membership. And so that's going to be on September 8th at El Pueblo in the Pico House. It's a nice setting. You might get to take a tour of El Pueblo after. We'll send out announcements about that, but for those of you who are members, be aware of that. Keep your eyes out for that if you're interested. And now I'd like to introduce the chair of the Marie Northrop Lecture Series Committee, who has been organizing the series this year. He's going to tell us a little bit about the film that we're going to watch, and then he's going to introduce the speaker after that. So let me bring up Michael Holland.
Thank you, Todd. Okay, so we've come to the third in our series of presentations for this year, focusing on faces of change in the city of Los Angeles. And I chose to use the city council as the vehicle for those changes. And so, of course, if you follow the series, we've started off with Robert Farrell. We followed that with Janice Hahn. And so now we have come to the third third section of the set of presentations for this year, dealing with I think one of the most diverse districts in all of Los Angeles, and that is the 11th District, for reasons that I hope we'll have a chance to expound upon. And if any of you are familiar with the 11th, or if you happen to live there, then your insights would be specifically of interest to us. So what we're going to do, if you've been here once or twice, you know we always have a film to start with. And so this is going to be no exception. So we have about a 15-minute video clip running through some of the council representation of the 11th District, beginning with Marvin, Braude, Cindy Miscikowski, Bill Rosendahl, who is more or less the center of our discussion, even though obviously he's not here to speak for himself, but thankfully we have Councilman Mike Bonin, who will be able to speak to Bill and, of course, some of his own work as well, so I'm looking forward to that. So we'll have about a 15-minute set of clips, and then we will bring up our panel, and we will then get started. So I thank you very much for your indulgence all season. And so as soon as Alan, who is running the booth in place of Russell Pyle today, is ready, we can go ahead, drop the lights, and start with the film.
Welcome back to the Week in Review. Now we're going to go and focus on Los Angeles City a little bit. But let's just talk politics for a second, Councilman. In April, early April, first Tuesday in April, there'll be an election for city council members. I guess 8 of the 15 are up for election or re-election or whatever the story is. Do you intend to run for re-election?
I've announced since last October that I am running, and I have been engaged in campaigning in a very active way.
Now, some of your critics and potential opponents say, Marvin's been in there. How long have you been in there in the city council?
32 years, and I'm proud of every year.
And they say as that 32 years is time for a change, time for new blood. How do you respond to that?
Well, that's not a substantive issue. First of all, I'm the most aggressive reformer and the most willing to change of any of the city councilmen. I put my record up against anyone. And if you're interested in leadership, in new ideas, such as creating a great park in the Santa Monica Mountains, I had that vision, and now we have a great park. And those are the kinds of things I can do. And I'm the one who fought oil drilling along the coast. And we won that battle. And we beat Occidental Petroleum. And I'm the one who was able to lead the city to adopt Proposition U, which reformed the planning process of the city more significantly than any other change heretofore. It halved the density, that is the bulk of buildings that could be allowed in commercial streets.
Okay, appreciate that. Anybody else for last question? Okay.
He's also the councilman who has all my friends smoking cigars.
Okay, Councilman, thank you very much for coming. We appreciate it very much, and we'll have you back when the campaign starts heating up in the late winter. Viewers, we're going to take a short break. We'll be right back.
He leaves office June 30th after 32 years on the City Council. Marvin Braude leaves with a record of legislative accomplishments that reflects his vision as the first environmentalist ever elected to the council, and the dedication and commitment he demonstrated and the hard work he has shown us all how to get the job done. He was involved in the motivating force behind the 1973 adoption of the Mulholland Scenic Route Corridor, which created a scenic parkway and stopped the threat of overdevelopment in the Mulholland area. Because of his diligent hard work, Marvin Braude's fondest dream was realized in 1978 when the Congress established the Santa Monica Mountains National Park and Recreation Area. As a strong and vocal supporter of bicycling, he created the first bicycle path in the Venice Beach area, and he uses it often. He has won passage of height limits on adjacent commercial developments on major streets in the 11th District, and won the adoption of the ordinance establishing 2- and 3-story height limits zoning overlay for the city application. What can we say about Marvin's anti-smoking stance? As someone who used to smoke, Marvin decided he'd quit and he'd like everybody else to join him. So, widely recognized as a nationwide leader in the fight to protect non-smokers from the health hazard of exposing to secondhand smoke, Marvin never stopped working on proposals winning bans on smoking in elevators in 1975, in grocery stores, medical care facilities, and theaters in 1977, in enclosed workplaces in 1983, in retail stores, service lines, private schools, and on behalf of and half of seating in restaurants in 1986, and he made it complete in all parts of the restaurant in 1993. He even got me to make a motion to say that the Coliseum was a non-smoking area, and it is. His Proposition U in 1986, which cut in half the permitted density of commercial structures in about 80% of the city. And Proposition O in 1988, which protected the integrity and beauty of the city's beaches by prohibiting oil exploration and drilling on them.
Immeasurably, because the truth is, for anybody around here who is ever looking to be an advocate for something or have the cause that you care about, the most you're going to learn and the most effectively that you're going to learn is to talk and listen closely to those who oppose you, because you're going to hear kernels there of things that maybe you can't agree on and kernels in which you can work together. But knowing best those who don't agree with you is going to serve you best in the long run. I've got folks in this council chamber who have said to me, you know, that staff of yours, they've been a little too tough, or they've been a little too pushy, or they've been a little too hard. But they are doing it with a passion, what they believe in, and knowing that I've said to them, I don't have to give them marching orders. I value their intelligence, their knowledge, and what they're doing, and it's the right thing. I'm so grateful to see the members of the community who are here. It's been a long, long run, nearly 30 years that I started with Marvin. Longevity does count for a lot, but it doesn't only count for a lot just being in elected office here and talking about short-timers. There is life in all levels of being involved in this great city and what we do, and that's why I'm not going away. I will be here after respite and after Doug has said, okay, you know, enough with you, get back and find something to do, I hope I will be able to come back here and do other good things with you. I would just say that it's been an incredible council membership that I've had the good fortune to serve with, particularly these last 8 years, and I include Mike Hernandez in that as a council colleague. You are all, obviously we all know what we go through in the test to get here through that elected life, but then once here, without a doubt, I can say this group of people understands each other, comes from different perspectives, but it's easy to be friends with the group of people who are elected here today, because I think that sense of importance of the city, that sense of importance of listening to each other as colleagues is palpable. And that wasn't always the case. I've served through my time with Marvin with over 60 people who've sat in these seats as council members. And this group is by far one of the most enjoyable. It makes it fun for me to come to work, even if it is sitting here for long, long hours and long, long meetings. And I think that's about all I have to say, other than just thank you all for being a very, very, very special part of my life. And there was one person who said to me, I hope it's not quite taken in the way he meant it, but he said to me, Cindy, thank you for giving the better part of your life to the city of Los Angeles. And it's because of the people like you who I've had a joy in having that happen. Thank you.
There's so much to say about Bill Rosendahl. There's so many stories I could tell. And, you know, before I was Bill's chief of staff back in 2005, I was his campaign manager. And when we did the ballot designation that Park Skelton, his consultant, came up with was journalist/professor. Bill was at the time teaching at Cal State Dominguez Hills. And Rick Taylor, who was working on the other side, challenged that ballot designation, claiming that Bill was just a lecturer. And David Asper Johnson, the late great editor and publisher of the Argonaut newspaper, called Cal State Dominguez Hills and confirmed that his title actually was Distinguished Visiting Professor. So throughout the course of the campaign until Bill was sworn in, I always called him Professor. And I'm thinking today of him as a professor because I've been awash with emotions this morning, remembering all the different things he's taught me and taught our staff, taught some of you, and taught our constituents. You know, the scariest part of my day, or the part of any of our staff members' day, was in between 9:15 and 9:45 in the morning, when Bill was on his way to work, and he was calling with the 7 or 8 ideas he had that morning. And you'd get off the phone and you'd talk to other staff, and you'd be baffled and exasperated because some of them we didn't have the money for, or we didn't have the time or the staff for, or they defied the laws of physics and gravity, or maybe just the law. And almost always, Bill managed to get some of that stuff done every day. It was impossible, and he got it done through the sheer force of his personality, his incredible optimism. You know, working for Bill has been a seminar every day in possibility. The thing that was so wonderful about working with Bill is that every day in that early morning phone call, he challenged each of us. He drew a circle around us and said, fill this up. He challenged us to fill that up with our hearts and our ambitions and to grow into that space. And so many of us did. Bill also gave us all room to grow in our personal lives. When Prop 8 passed, Bill gave me the room to work on trying to repeal that hateful measure in my spare time. When my sister grew ill and died, I could not have had a better and stronger person at my side than Bill Rosendahl, who gave me the room to be with my family and with my sister. Thank you, Bill. And the thing about Bill that we all know is he is all heart. You know, we can talk about the fruits of his labor, and we can talk about some of the things we talked about in the video. What we didn't talk about is how driven and how passionate he was for making sure that the unburied remains of the Gabrielino Tongva found a safe and quiet resting place at Playa Vista. Or how often Bill made time out of his busy and crazy schedule to visit someone who he didn't even know all that well in a hospital room so someone wouldn't be lonely in their illness. Or how when Bill toured Skid Row and was advised by health professionals, you need to wear gloves because of the risk of staph infection, Bill got down on his knees at the early hours of the morning and held people by the hand and hugged them. The heart of Bill Rosendahl knows absolutely no bounds, and it has guided him, and it is his greatest legacy. Bill, I thank you for everything, and I absolutely love you.
Okay.
Yeah, one more is my understanding.
I have one more. Many of you know that in 1968, I came to this great city for the first time. I was working for Bobby Kennedy. I had been with him in Indiana, where I ran the 4th Congressional District. Bobby asked me to come to Portland, Oregon. I brought 40 other college kids, and we went to Portland, Oregon for 3 weeks and brought out the vote. On Election Day, he wanted to meet with me and thank me for this, that, and the other, and of course there was a great moment again. And after he thanked me, he casually asked me, how am I going to do in Oregon? And I told him, unfortunately, he was going to lose. So the rumor was there was a kid named Rosendahl who didn't tell the politician what he needed to know, but told him the truth. Well, he ended up losing in Oregon. And then, of course, he invited me to Los Angeles, where we were working on the rest of the campaign, getting really excited because we knew we would win in Los Angeles. We knew that Bobby Kennedy stood for the coalition of life, for him to get the Latino community, the grape and the union folks, brown, black, yellow, green, purple, all of us in humanity were part of the Bobby Kennedy campaign. Well, we all know history. When he decided to go through the pantry to go to where the press were rather than through the crowd, and any of us who works that closely with him know that taking Bobby through a crowd was a hell of a job. They tear your shirts off, they scream, they cry, people get very hysterical and all that, and it was a long day. So he went through the pantry. And as he walked through with Paul Schrade, who was the most powerful labor leader at the time, they got shot. And Bobby's last words were, how's Paul? Well, my next speaker to get up is Paul Schrade, who never forgot that moment, as did all of us who were part of that scene. And he said, I'm tearing down this Ambassador Hotel. We don't need no living, disgusting description of what happened there. What we need is something alive and well that stands for what Bobby Kennedy stood for. So Paul Schrade stepped to the plate, fought like hell. A couple of years ago, we did it, and now we have a collection of schools, 3,500 students, like a Harvard-like, Berkeley-like, right there in Central LA. Would not have happened without Paul Schrade, the Honorable Paul Schrade.
Okay, and it would be a great honor at this time if you were to give a welcome to the gentleman I'm going to introduce who will join me here on the stage so we can start this presentation. First and foremost, we are going to have the opportunity to talk to, listen to, and hopefully ask questions of the current office holder of Council District 11, who you saw in the video clip, the councilman right now, Mike Bonin. Thank you. And to his right, we're going to also have the wisdom of Dr. Joseph Hawkins, who is the Executive Director of the One Archives at USC, and that is, according to Dr. Hawkins, the largest archive collection of material related to the gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans, and queer community in the world. And he is going to hopefully offer some insight into some of the history of this particular set of communities. Thank you very much, and gentlemen, let us begin. Well, first of all, thank you, Mr. Bonin, for joining us today. When you and I had our face-to-face meeting a week or two back, I think one of the first things that you said was, "What the hell did I sign up for?" I mean, I know that obviously your schedule is completely and totally overprogrammed, as any public official is these days. So I, again, want to thank you for giving us a couple of hours of your time. Looking at the video clips, what I hope came out was that the progression, and in maybe some cases the flipping back of the type of personality that saw development in Council District 11 from Marvin Braude's time in the 1960s up to today. And part of that has to do with the fact that you had, by the way, Cindy Miscikowski, I actually invited her. She was not able to attend, but I did sit down with her a couple of weeks ago, and she gave me some good information and some context, and I will probably be trying to include some of that context into some of the conversations that we're going to be having. So bear with me as we kind of jump around a little bit on that. To kind of condense the developments of the people running the district at City Hall, Marvin Braude was a political novice when he came to City Hall in 1965. As far as elective office is concerned, he had been doing some teaching in Illinois before he came out to California, and was able to get himself elected to the council in 1965. Cindy described him to me as an incrementalist, and I think that's important to consider because, as we've talked about a couple of times during this series, term limits or the lack of term limits sometimes can have an effect on what sort of issues you are able to take up or how you're able to make things happen incrementally. And Marvin was apparently was the perfect description of someone who took a great deal of time but was relentless. In the video clip with John Ferraro talking about all of the changes to the no smoking policy, first starting in elevators and then expanding that area a little bit and then a little bit more and a little bit more. And Cindy described that as basically the way that he operated. And because he had basically a 32-year run to do a lot of these things, whether it was smoking or the Santa Monica Mountains or the bike paths or the other pet projects, and also things that that he saw were important, he was able to do that. And so then in 1972, a graduate of UCLA comes to work for Marvin named Cindy Miscikowski. And she went to work on his campaign to become county supervisor, which he lost. But she stayed on and eventually became his planning deputy, and then eventually became his chief of staff. And so then after 32 years, when he finally decided to step aside, and she came in, and she had discovered her passion of planning and land use. And so those issues became part of her particular legislative focus, in addition to, of course, doing the other things. And we'll get back to some of that. Then, of course, so she was the longtime staffer who eventually became council and, of course, served the full 8 years that term limits allowed at that time. 2005 comes along. We have a new political newcomer, as far as elected office is concerned, in the person of Bill Rosendahl. And we'll get into a little bit more about that in a couple of minutes. And then, of course, 2013, We have another longtime staffer, not just for Bill, but for several other people as well that we're going to get in a little bit into. And so that kind of brings us up to where we are as far as who's been in the job. And in the meantime, the district changed not just because of population, but also of geographics. If you look at any of the district maps every 10 years when they're redistricted, when the lines are redrawn, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, when you started off, you were with Ruth Galanter in CD6.
Yes.
And at that time, CD6, Council District 6, was south of where Council District 11 is. And it included Mar Vista, included Venice and the airport, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, what's interesting is Marvin had served so long that there were parts of the district that Cindy got in 2003 that Ruth Galanter had been representing, that Marvin had represented previously. The southern part of the district, Westchester, the airport, and Venice was all in Ruth's district. And when redistricting happened after the 2000 census, that all became one west side district that became the 11th district. But Venice had a few decades before actually been in Marvin's district.
Yeah.
And you heard them talk about the bike path, and that bike path on Venice Beach now is the Marvin Braude bike path.
Yeah. And so the geography changed, and so now Council District 6 is up in the northeast San Fernando Valley. And so a completely different emphasis and completely different focus for Ms. Martinez, I'm sure. But starting off with, now, of course, your background is you're originally from Massachusetts. You went to UMass. No, which university? Harvard. Oh, my apologies. And you got a history degree there.
Yes.
Okay, as someone else with a history degree, would it be fair for me to ask you, what was your intention when you got that history? What do you think you were going to be able to do with it?
Oh, I was, my entire life I'd wanted to be a newspaper reporter. And I was for a few years in Massachusetts, got some wanderlust and spent a few months on Greyhound buses going cross country, and ran out of money and continent in California, and never expected to spend more than a couple months in Los Angeles. And it's been, 28 years now. So, and then when I was here, I was actually a reporter for a while for a chain of black-owned weeklies in South LA, the Wave newspapers. I covered Crompton and Watts, and did some freelance reporting for Frontiers Magazine and for KPFK Radio.
Okay, and then you stumbled into local politics somehow?
I stumbled into local politics because, much like now, the newspaper industry in the mid-'90s was tanking. And I think in the few years since I had moved to Southern California, about 20 to 25% of the print journalists in Southern California had been laid off. Papers were just folding and shrinking. And so I started going on job interviews really for practice. And Ruth Galanter was my representative. I lived in Venice at the time, and she and I sort of hit it off, and I thought very hard about whether or not I wanted to go from journalism to what I considered to be the dark side. And I eventually made the leap, and I'm still there.
Well, in journalism, the dark side would have been public relations.
Yeah.
But yeah, you became basically what you've been covering.
Yes, exactly.
And what did you find yourself doing in Ruth's office when you first got there? I mean, was there a specialty that you were leaning towards, or did you kind of feel along the way what you were good at, what they wanted you to do, or what passion you developed?
Well, when they first brought me in, I was a legislative staffer. I actually worked on the council floor for Ruth for the first year and a half or 2 years, where I actually got to work alongside Marvin and got to know Cindy, and staffed Ruth on the environmental committee that she served on with Marvin, and got to handle all the legislative efforts for her towards the late 90s, primarily focusing on environmental issues and public safety issues. And then after a couple of years, I really got tired of being locked in what I still describe as that marble prison. And I asked to get sent out to the district because I really wanted to be out in the neighborhoods and get my hands dirty, roll up my sleeves. And so they moved me out there and made me her district director, which is a position I held for about 5 years until she was termed out.
And then after she was termed out, you went to work for Jane Harmon.
I did. I briefly thought about running for council when Ruth was going to term out, and then they moved her district into the San Fernando Valley. So our last year in office, we actually had offices in Sun Valley and Van Nuys. Even though she still lived in Venice, they literally lifted her district and put it in the middle of the valley. And to her credit, she rolled up her sleeves and she really, really dug in. And when she was termed out, I went to work for Congresswoman Harmon, who represented Venice. I basically worked for Venice and Westchester since '96, essentially. And she represented a coastal district that went down, and I was her deputy chief of staff and district director until this crazy, loud, big-hearted guy named Bill Rosendahl, who I'd only met once before then, asked me to breakfast. He had heard that I might be thinking of running, so he was trying to talk me out of running. And he and I had breakfast at the Firehouse Restaurant in Venice at Main and Rose. And I think it lasted about 3 hours. We just absolutely hit it off. I mean, we were in sync on the issues. I loved his passion, and he doesn't quite remember this. Bill would often say something and then 5 minutes later say, "What did I say?" after like a big speech. But after this meeting, at this meeting, he actually said to me, "Will you manage my campaign and then be my chief of staff?" And I was basically hooked at that point. And so I left Congresswoman Harmon and ran his campaign for about a year.
And he got elected, you went in with him, and you stayed with him.
I did. I was with him the whole time. And Michael shared with me this clip in advance, and I didn't watch it in advance, and I wish I had, because it was quite emotional for me to see that again. No, in a good way. I loved Bill. I really, really did. I mean, he was my friend. He was my mentor. He was like an uncle to me. After I got elected, he and I lived literally one block apart. And when I adopted my son, he would have fresh eggs from his chickens. He had about 30 chickens in his backyard every day. So Jacob, for the first year and a half of his time with us, ate fresh chickens from Bill Rosendahl's, fresh eggs from Bill Rosendahl's backyard. And he was just, I mean, I think I probably captured it better than I will now in that clip. I mean, his heart was just so big, and he was irrepressible. It made him exhausting to work for. It was the most exhausting experience because he just wanted to do so much, and he was so big and so impulsive. But it all came from love, and it all came from this idea that anything is possible and anybody has the potential to make anything possible. And it was infectious. And his loss a couple years ago still, it honestly, Bill's death haunts me and motivates me. I mentioned my sister died when I was working for Bill as well, and I've had a number of friends die from cancer way too young, including Bill. And it has given me a real sense of my mortality and a real impatience in this job that, there could be a wreck on the freeway on the way home today. I don't know that I will have the opportunity to do this job tomorrow, and I've got to do as much as I can today. And that's, part of it is haunted from the fact that Bill died before he finished what he wanted to do, and part of it is just in my head, Bill saying every single day, all we have is this moment. All we have is this moment. And it was his mantra, and it's part of me now.
And one of the things that had come up several times in this, in this series, as I mentioned, was the idea: what did term limits? How did term limits affect what someone was able to do in office? And so, Bob Farrell, for example, when he was on the stage, we talked about the things that were able to be built up over time, the various coalitions and the various relationships that could eventually, over time, result in these great and wonderful things going on. Whereas term limits, where basically you have a clock starting on day one and assuming you get reelected the prerequisite number of times, 8 years or 12 years, whatever, that changes your focus. And so Janice Hahn was very, very upfront when she said that as supervisor, her primary focus is to go back and look at what her father did during his 40 years as a supervisor and build on those things and strengthen those things and make them work better. For her, that is the legacy that when she hated the word legacy, that's what she wanted to be able to focus on, to do as much as she can. And so as I said, you're a long-term staffer. You started off well over 20 years ago. And so there are issues that you have been working on ever since, and you're still working on those. And so where are you in all of that? How do you feel about where you are with those projects right now, those things you wish to do?
Well, let me first say a word about term limits, and I'll sort of get to the rest of the answer that way. Is what's been weird about term limits is that it hasn't had as much of an impact upon the 11th District as it has other places, because Cindy had continuity from Marvin. And while there was a definite break and change between Cindy and Bill, you know, I bring a lot of continuity from Bill, a lot of focus on the same issues, the same projects. And it really takes, to get anything done in the city, like a sizable project, it takes like 10 years. I mean, it really does. And it's ridiculous, but that's the reality of it. And so if you're only there for 8 years, it's hard to get stuff done. I had the benefit of, you know, having worked for this district for 20 years, so when I came in, I was able to finish a lot of stuff that Bill and I had worked on together. You know, there had basically been a war between the airport, LAX, and its neighbors for generations. And, you know, Bill had a saying, modernization, yes, expansion, no. And when I got in, I was able to broker an end to the lawsuits that made that a reality. And I couldn't have done that had I been a freshman who had no experience in the building. I wouldn't have had the background or the credibility with either side to have done that. One of the biggest impacts I think term limits have had is it's the wrong solution to a correctly identified problem. The correctly identified problem is that elections are not well contested, particularly at the local level. I'm certainly not complaining about it at the moment, but they're not particularly well contested, and it's because of an imbalance in campaign finance, and you know, independent expenditures can rule the day. So the idea was get people out so others can come in. The real solution is actually having campaign finance reform or public financing of elections. The impact it's had is incredible turnover that has really harmed some communities because they haven't had the continuity in leadership or representation, because people are always looking to run for the next job. And so, you know, if a congressional seat opens up and then a council member runs for it, then the council seat, you know, becomes vacant. You don't focus while you're running for Congress, and it becomes vacant. You've got that community goes 6 months without a representative. Someone comes in, and then that person then winds up a year later running for state assembly or state senate. And you know, the Northeast San Fernando Valley in particular has been hit really hard by that. The 6th and the 7th district for a while had, the 7th district in particular has had a tremendous amount of turnover, and communities feel really appropriately aggrieved that they haven't had enough representation that's sitting still to deliver on what the community wants.
I'm going to switch gears a little bit here, partially because I want to make sure that Joseph gets a chance to educate us a little bit, I hope. One of the reasons I wanted this particular presentation to be structured this way is that this is Pride Month. And believe that it's important that we basically, hopefully, at least for myself, and when you and I had lunch the other day, I was basically asking you what, I'm not the best person on this stage to talk about this, or I want to ask intelligent questions, respectful questions. So I asked you, coach me a little bit as far as what do I and maybe everyone else out there needs to know about Gay History 101, I guess, is if I can put it that way. Why is it, for example, that generally we don't know that much about that particular history, and hopefully work up to, so why did Bill Rosendahl make such a big impact on people basically coming out, for example, or what face did he bring to the job that being who he was, did it make it easier, more approachable? Was it a positive thing for someone to say, oh yeah, I'm a gay person, I'm running for office, and people look at Bill and say, oh, okay, so they're gay, so what? Let's move on to the substantive issue, not the gender thing, not the racial thing as they used to be. So, Joseph, what do we need to know about gay history?
What do we need to know about
Take as much time as you want.
I know. Let me start out by saying that I teach gender studies. I teach men and masculinity. I teach a course called Introduction to the Homophile Community in Los Angeles. So for those of you who don't know, just a little bit of background. So I run the largest LGBT archive in the world. It's one archives at USC Libraries, and part of the reason that I'm up here is because Bill was really, really helpful to us. So I'll start out by saying that back when I started teaching, if I had a class of 35 students and I asked them, how many of you know who Harvey Milk was, I'd probably get 2 hands that were raised out of a class of 35. And some of them people from San Francisco. Nowadays, because of the Sean Penn movie, everybody's in the know. They've got the picture. But in those days, nobody did. And the reason for that is because nobody can teach you in high school, or until recently, no one could teach you in high school anything about LGBT history because everybody got up in arms and refused to allow it to be taught there. So as a result of that, a lot of people didn't know who Harvey Milk was, even though he was the Martin Luther King of the gay and lesbian movement. I mean, he was a really important figure. So when I look back at Los Angeles was sort of the epicenter of LGBT rights development. It was going on here in 1939, way before it happened any other place. That thing, Stonewall, it sort of usurps all of the attention, but the reality was things were happening many, many years before here. At any rate, the reason, though, that I met Bill was because I knew that he was gay, and I knew that he was out, and I knew that he was somebody who seemed approachable and was somebody who I could go talk to. So I went and I spoke to him, and we were applying for a huge grant. I had stupidly volunteered to be a part of the Pacific Standard Time exhibition at the Getty. I didn't know that you had to apply for a grant. I just thought that once they said yes to you, that they would give you the money. Instead, what happened was I went there, they said yes to me, and then they said, but we don't have any money, so you'll have to make your own exhibit. So I had to go out and raise $107,000, and part of that problem was trying to find people who would give me money in the community. And Bill had interviewed on a television show that he had had on one of the cable networks, Joel Wax, who became the director for the Andy Warhol Foundation. And because they were friends, Bill called him up and said, hey, there's this guy out here. He just applied stupidly to get in the PST thing, and he needs some money. Do you guys know anything about that? What would you do? And he said, just have them call me. So I called, and we spoke, and I put in the application not knowing whether or not I would be getting any money, but they did, in fact, fund us. And that's how we did our first PST exhibit. That was part of the funding that came for that. And we got more from private sources and other sources. But then Bill, like any politician, decided to collect. So he called me up when gay marriage was approaching, and they hadn't voted on it yet. And he said, I need an exhibition in my council district for gay marriage. So I threw something together. We built a big birthday cake, or a wedding cake out of this stuff, and it was like anyway, we put it in there, and we had people like George Takei and others give testimonials, and we put photographs up, and we put the exhibition there, and Bill was hopefully thrilled with it. And he was great to me. He was always really, really kind. He was such a big-hearted guy that it was really great for me as a constituent to be able to go up to somebody like that and just say, I need some help, what can you do? And he did what he could.
You were having a meeting with him.
Yes. And I went to his office, and I was ushered in, and he took his teeth out. And I suppose I was supposed to be made nervous by that. But actually,
I always was.
Pardon me?
I always was.
But it actually endeared me in some way, because it felt like there was no artifice. Like he was not there to be glamorous and cool and powerful and all those things that you often think that people who hold office are trying so hard to do. He was actually just a guy who really wanted to help people, and he was genuinely open and transparent, and it made me feel weirdly comfortable, because I felt like, oh, well, I don't now have to worry about putting up any front on my own. I don't have to be anybody but who I am.
Let me add something on that. Yeah, Bill took his teeth out a lot. He also had a habit of, no matter who he was talking to, if his cell phone rang, he would pick it up. He and I were sitting with Antonio Villaraigosa one day in the mayor's office talking about LAX, and Bill's cell phone rang. And Antonio was talking to him, and Bill picked up the phone and started chatting. And Antonio looked at me like, what the freak is going on here? And then Bill eventually put the phone down. But for Bill, I mean, that could have been someone in need. So he always picked up the phone. We were meeting once with Charlie Munger, who is one of the richest men in the universe, over a potential and controversial development in Brentwood. And someone called and passed me a piece of paper, and it was someone who was about to get evicted in our district, and they wanted Bill to call the landlord to intervene. And I knew, I'm going to pass him this note, and he's going to throw Charlie out and help this person be prevented from being homeless. And he did. That is exactly what he did, and that was Bill. And his genuineness, and this gets to your question about sort of the role he played in the LGBT community, is, I mean, he and I were from very different generations, and we used to talk about the different experience. And he used to say, until Prop 8 passed, I was spoiled, because I grew up thinking I was equal until Prop 8 passed, whereas he had lived through the horrors of the AIDS crisis. His partner died. So many of his friends died. He grew up in a different era where you were closeted and you struggled more. And his election seemed, to my generation, like, all right, well, another gay guy got elected. Jackie Goldberg had been on the council. Joel came out on Joel Wax on Bill's TV show when he was running for mayor. And but for Bill's generation, it was phenomenally significant. The number of times someone of Bill's generation came to him and said, for the first time out loud, I'm gay. It happened all the time. Guys in their 70s breaking down in tears, hugging Bill in his office. I mean, they'd been married, they had kids, but they didn't get to live their truth. And Bill brought out that ability to enunciate and articulate and live your truth in folks. I mean, it was really a very, very special gift, I think, that he had.
Yeah, I mean, I always felt like when I was around him, he was really courageous. He was really fearless. He just would say whatever it was that he needed to say to get whatever it was done. And he was selfless, too. It didn't seem to me like this was all about him. It was about the people who were the constituents.
Bill was literally selfless, and I saw it a million times. He used to live very close to Venice Beach, and Venice has had a problem of homelessness for a very, very long time. Bill literally took people in, literally off the street into his house, live with me. Swami X, who was a performer on Venice Beach, was homeless. Bill took him in for over 20 years, paid for his medical care, his hospice care, cared for Swami until the day he died. Bill's house was a home for the lost and wayward. He kept taking people in. Anytime you would go over, there would be someone who needed a place to stay, and Bill was providing for them. He sent money every month to some guy he knew in D.C. to help support him. There was a very vocal gadfly who came to council every month who was homeless, and Bill got him a place to stay in affordable housing by the beach and would meet him once a month at Whole Foods and give him $100. And then the guy would come down to council and still scream at Bill. And Bill was okay with that. He'd still give him a hug and still give him $100. It was just, he just had that love. He did.
Joseph, we just heard about the difference between Rosendahl's generation and those who have come along since. But what was it like prior to that and during the time that Rosendahl was coming up? As far as, I mean, how did gay and lesbian people, make it? What did you have to do to socialize or to make your way in the environment that you were living in at the time?
Well, in the 1940s, when the Mattachine Society and the other clubs that were gay groups started, first of all, you have to know that the reason they're called weird names like One Incorporated or the Mattachine was because you couldn't have anything called the LGBT anything. Second of all, people met in those places by coming in staggered entrances 15 minutes apart, and then they'd pull the shades because you could get arrested for something called illegal congregation. So those were two of the things. But in politics, just to give you an idea, Ed Davis once was written a letter by the CSW board to ask if he would appear in the gay parade. And his response was, when there is, and we have this at our archive, this is why I know about it, his response was, when the parade is about treating people with the sickness of homosexuality, then I will join. 3 years later, he was in the back of a car waving because he found out how many bucks that LGBT people were giving to campaigns. So as a result of that, it began to change, and it has changed since the beginning. I mean, some of the folks who live in here in LA don't realize that in the 1920s, though, it was also very popular. There was something called the pansy craze here, and you had Julian Eltinge, who was this famous cross-dressing performer, who was one of the most famous people in Silver Lake. And then just a few months later, at the end of the war, all that was anathema, and nobody was gay, and everybody was hiding it. And it wasn't until there was repression from the McCarthy period, really, that I think gay people just felt like, you know what, we have very little to lose. They're going to get us anyway. So they rose up en masse, and that's when things really radically started to change. So in Bill's generation, like mine, I'm not that much younger, it was really horrifying. I mean, you could lose your job. So everybody that I know who is at the archive who did writing prior to the 1960s, I would say, has an AKA. Lesbians, gay men, doesn't matter. They all had cover names. My favorite is Edith Eads, who published the first lesbian zine here in Los Angeles in 1947 called Vice Versa. Her first name was Tigrina the Devil Doll, which she used as a science fiction writer and as a cult leader. And later she became Lisa Ben, which was an anagram for lesbian. So there were a lot of folks in that period of time who were hiding in plain sight, using these kinds of vehicles. But by the time Bill came into power in the in politics, I'd say there had been a sea change and things had begun to change, but still it took a lot of courage to stand up, to be who you were like he was.
Bill's name, his gay bar name, Michael Stone. He picked it because Stone sounded strong and masculine. He used to tell that story all the time.
But Joseph, we were also talking at one point about the role of beards in in navigating gay culture, or the gay mother in the bar, and I was surprised to discover that up till about the 1970s, gay and lesbians got along just fine, and then the second wave of feminism came in, and the lesbians basically said, "We don't need you guys anymore," or things of that effect.
That's not exactly what happened, but what happened was, I think the consciousness for women who were lesbian went along with feminism at that particular time, and they had to do, like many people did in liberation ideology, find a place of their own for a little while. And so that's where separatism came into existence. But prior to that time, what was really interesting to me is I have a friend who's 97 and a half. She lives out in 29 Palms, and I go visit her on a regular basis. She and her partner Marvin were in the Women's Army Corps during World War II. And so Esther always says to me that, we were just two old spinsters with a cat. Nobody ever knew. And they actually hid in plain sight all of their lives, but she had beards, and her beards had beards, which she was one of. Beards is a meaning basically that if you had to go to an office party, you had to have a woman to take with you if you were a gay man, and if you were a gay woman, then you had to take a man to be your boyfriend. And so they made these arrangements, and so people would in fact carry along another person with them. Leo Buscaglia, who was the love doctor on television here in Los Angeles, was in fact Esther's beard for many, many years. So women and men in that generation had a very different relationship because they were codependent in this need for this beard situation, whereas later on in the 1960s and 70s, obviously there was no need for that, and there was lesbian separatism. And I was saying to you that the reason I was illustrating that is that by the time the 1980s come along, and AIDS is a really horrifying specter at that particular moment, lesbian women come back into the gay community with a fierce courage and begin protecting men and caring for them, and they're dying. And it was a really, really big moment. It was changed the face of the gay community in a number of ways.
And you also mentioned to me that because of the AIDS crisis, that there is a generation of gay men now specifically who don't have the mentors that earlier generations had.
Yeah, and I actually learned of this by being on a panel like this one by mistake. I was sitting there, and a young man was asked by someone in the audience, "Don't you get grossed out by being around old men?" And the young man who was on the panel said, "No, I'm actually really good at saying no. So I don't understand why that would bother me, but I really would like to sit next to them sometimes and talk to them because there's an entire generation of people that I don't know anything about." And I thought that was a really funny thing to say. So when we were finished speaking, he said to me, "Oh yeah, like all those guys who died during the 80s, like we could have used some of their knowledge and their wisdom, and they're all gone." So there was an entire group of a generation that came up. And the reason I was mentioning it was because of the fact that when I came out, we all had gay mothers. And gay mothers were older gay men who said things like, "Do not go to that bar dressed like that. Do not go to that bar unless you take a baseball bat." Things like that were really essential, and you got trained. So without that schooling, you were pretty much on your own. And to bring that back to Bill just a little bit, one of the things that I found really great about him is he was such a great mentor. He was always so willing. No matter how busy he was, you could pick up the phone, call him, and he would actually talk to you, which is, I've not experienced that with a lot of politicians. It was really, really wonderful just be able to call him up on the phone and say, what do you recommend I do about this? And he'd say, call this guy. And then that would be the end of that.
Let's see. One of my notes here is I mentioned earlier, and it was kind of mentioned that Marvin Braude worked as an incrementalist, slowly by a degree, slowly over time, again, because he had the time to put all these things in place. Someone had given Rosendahl the title of the city council's conscience, and being out in front when it came to the veterans and the homeless, and whatever he was passionate about that particular moment. And I think I know the answer to this one, Mike. But I'm going to ask you, how is there a line or a sentence or a phrase? And I think it's probably the one painted on your office wall that I saw when I was there. That do you want to kind of give yourself a label like that in your own words?
Yeah, sure. I mean, before I do it, the incremental thing about Marvin,
yeah,
as you and I discussed, there was absolutely nothing incremental about Bill Rosendahl. Nothing incremental. I mean, he wanted it all yesterday, and it was. I mean, he was literally a force of nature in that regard, whether it was political or whether it was personal. I remember on his first campaign, we were at an event and there was some cute guy I saw, and I was sort of interested in him, and I thought, oh, I'll see if I can find a way to get his name or phone number. Bill just brought me over to him and said, this is Mike, you guys should go out. I mean, he was just, boom, that was Bill. And I think I've brought into the job that same impatience, and I think I get more impatient every day in this job. The sort of mantra for my office is move Los Angeles forward, do good, and get shit done.
Yeah. And
the do good part really comes from Bill. I am not an incrementalist. I will take incremental steps if that's as much as we can get, but I want to push the boundaries as far as possible. When we did the minimum wage in Los Angeles, as we talked about, the original proposal by others was $13, and I'm like, no, we need to do 15. I had thought of 15 earlier because it was sort of the national campaign. I didn't want us to fall short of that, and I insisted on it, and I stood strong on 15. And part of it was I thought if I didn't stay strong on 15, they're never going to get 13. Somebody needs to be out there pounding on the edge, and lo and behold, we got the 15 in the end, and then the county followed suit, and Santa Monica followed suit, and the state of California followed suit, and that was an impatient, go for it, Rosendahl type approach.
And something that Cindy told me was that the reason that Marvin was able to do so much over his time was, in addition to what he brought to the 11th, but also when Zev Yaroslavsky was elected to the 5th, the two of them kind of formed a bond and had a synthesis between their districts. Of course, they were adjoining districts, both on the west side, a couple of the most affluent districts in the city. And whereas Marvin was the incrementalist, always the slow, patient thinker, Zev was considerably more big picture, broad stroke kind of personality. And he, according to Cindy, it would take time, but he could pull Marvin out a little bit further than where maybe Marvin felt comfortable. At the same time, Marvin and Cindy would keep Zev grounded. And of course, that continued once Zev became supervisor, and so that continued forward. And so obviously they were able to do a lot with that kind of synergy. And I asked you if there was any kind of similar relationship between you and another district, and you kind of surprised me with talking about the 8th district as opposed to the 5th or possibly the 3rd, which do physically adjoin the 11th.
Yeah, I mean, naturally you would think that the sort of west side is the alliance, and Paul Koretz and I have a lot in common and a very similar outlook on a lot of issues. particularly environmental issues, both strong progressives. But I think the member of the council that I most intuitively am drawn to working with, that I have the strongest philosophical and political alignment with, and the strongest partnership with, is Marquise Harris Dawson from the 8th District, which, for those who don't know, is Crenshaw, South LA, the district that Bernie Parks used to represent, and Bob Farrell and Mark Ridley Thomas. And it's an unusual one, because you don't think of a partnership between one of the most affluent districts and one of the lowest income districts in the city. But you know, it's important for me as a progressive to get stuff done, and you need an alliance to do that. You know, we're past the era where you know, white liberals on the west side determine the fate of our city. You know, the center of power is elsewhere. We're a more diverse city. Other segments of Los Angeles have rightfully claimed the power that should have been theirs generations before. And as a member of the LGBTQ community, I've always felt very strongly that we have an obligation, I feel anyway, to be forming coalitions with other people. You know, the LGBT community has a gift in that it is one of the most diverse communities in the world. In public consciousness and too long in activism, it's been upper middle class white men that have been the face of the community. In the wake of Prop 8, that changed. The repeal Prop 8 movement was grassroots. It was black, and it was brown, and it was women, and it was bisexuals, and it was the trans community. It was everybody who sort of came out and demanded their voice be heard. And you know, my feeling about the politics we're in right now, this horrible moment, is that the same people who want to force our teenagers into reparative therapy are the same people who are opposing gun control. And the same people who want to deny us marriage are the same people who are trying to strip kids of health insurance. And the same people who want to you know, come up with these ridiculous bathroom rules are the same people who are trying to take away women's reproductive rights, or get rid of unions. I mean, it's the same thing. And for me, it's part of a big, broad struggle for equality, for justice. And I love working with Marquise because he brings a very different perspective on that and a very different temperament. He's much more chill than I am. And that balances me a lot, which is good.
And just as a curious aside, in the video clip, you mentioned that the worst time of the morning for a staffer was 9:15 to 9:45. Is there anything equivalent like that to your staff that you're aware of now, since patience is not something you carry a lot with you?
No group of people is happier, including my family, that I am a dad than my staff. Because it used to be I would get up at 5, I'd be doing the Rosendahl thing and barking out all sorts of orders and ideas and concepts, and they'd wake up and they'd look at their email at 7 a.m. and they'd be like, oh, can I just go back under the covers again? Now I have the most beautiful and boisterous 4-year-old in the world to deal with at 6 in the morning, and so they just have to wait for me to come to work. And so by then I'm probably easier to deal with because I'm not blowing up the beginning of their day. I'm blowing up the middle of their morning.
And as a matter of fact, something that talked about briefly was you live in Mar Vista, and there's been a few things going on in in that part of the district, but but some of the reasoning for it is that because you live there, you're raising your family there, and you want it to be more walkable, you want it to be more approachable, you want it to be more, is holistic, maybe not too far a stretch as far as what you want to see in an area like that. And I would think back to what Cindy told me, that San Vicente was a little area that, starting with Marvin, and then she wanted to basically use it kind of like a mini laboratory to try to find ways to do more types of, if there was a bank that was open during the day, well, could there be something open after hours that's more pedestrian friendly or just more publicly approachable, like a restaurant or some sort of meeting space or something along those lines. And so Mar Vista and Venice, you mentioned to me, are a relatively small part of the district, about maybe 15 to 20% of the district space, and yet they take up at least half of your time.
Well, first of all, thank you for what is the most polite way of characterizing the past year of my political life. For those who haven't paid attention, let me sort of explain what his question was about. He referred to stuff in Mar Vista. Over the past year, I've faced the prospect of a potential recall because of efforts I've done to put in protected bike lanes and reduce traffic lanes. Putting in a bike lane is part of the legacy of the 11th District, as we saw in the clip, but it's gotten a lot more challenging since Marvin's time. The prism that I come from, and I think this is important for everybody in Los Angeles to know this, is we have a public health and safety epidemic in the city of Los Angeles. There are more people in Los Angeles who die from traffic fatalities than from gang violence. The leading cause of death in Los Angeles County of people under the age of 14 are traffic fatalities. The people most likely to be severely injured or killed in a traffic fatality are kids, are seniors, are people of color, are people with disabilities, are people who are undocumented, pedestrians and cyclists. And it really is a huge epidemic and has been getting worse in Los Angeles, and we know exactly where it's going to happen. We can look at the data and we can look at the maps and we can see exactly where it's going to happen. Not coincidentally, some of the worst places in the city are in South Los Angeles and in the East San Fernando Valley. It's one of the issues where Marquise and I have formed a strong alliance, because those areas have had historic underinvestment. At the same time, we are never, ever, ever going to get out of gridlock in Los Angeles if the only safe, convenient, viable option for most people is the single occupancy automobile. It is just never going to happen. In Los Angeles, 50% of the trips that we make, 50%, are 3 miles or less. And 87% of them are done by car in a city with beautiful weather that is relatively flat. I don't believe that's because people hate walking. I don't believe that's because people hate cycling. I don't believe that's because people hate public transit. I believe it's because our sidewalks are crap, so we've made it hard for people to walk. Our cycling infrastructure is incredibly unsafe, so you don't want to use it unless you're a very hardy cyclist. And public transit doesn't feel safe for most folks. It doesn't run frequently enough. It's not clean enough. And we have an obligation to make those options more convenient and safe and accessible for everybody. And part of what that means is we have to make more walkable neighborhoods. And I've tried doing that in a couple places, and there's a lot of pushback on it. And in some cases, maybe I pushed too hard, or we didn't execute it right. But I think it's really important to try in government, and if you fail, you fail. Half of what FDR did failed, but a lot of it succeeded. And I think it's important to do that, particularly when it comes to public health and safety, and particularly when it comes to trying to imagine what do we need to do today for the next generation. Becoming a dad has changed my perspective on elective office, because I'm now actively thinking about, well, how are people going to get around in 20 years? how is my kid or his generation going to afford to live in Los Angeles with this incredible affordable housing crisis? Where are they going to play? How are the schools going to be? And I think we have an obligation as elected officials to think not just about the generation that has voted for us, but about the generation that is going to live in the neighborhoods that we're representing and shaping for a long time to come.
And I imagine also that impatience also has to do with the fact that he's 4.5 now, but he's growing up. And you're seeing that happen on a daily basis, regardless of anything else that's going on. So that hits you close to home, I would imagine.
And I'm considerably more patient than he is.
Bill's legacy, if he bothered long enough to sit down and think about it, because you mentioned that you really couldn't have a strategy meeting with him because he was not patient enough to sit down long enough and listen. What do you think his legacy, as far as he knew it, what was he most proud of? Is during his time in office, or maybe just his time in L.A. Period?
Well, I think Bill never, ever, ever wanted to have a conversation about legacy. One, he hated any strategic discussion, but he also just didn't like the idea of legacy. He really felt like we're here for this moment, and when we're done, we're done. And didn't want to think about how he might be remembered. Having said that, Bill is remembered fondly by everybody he touched, really. And I don't think Bill's legacy in the city is going to be a library or a park or anything like that. It's the way he made people feel. He was dedicated to informing and empowering people. I think more than his service in government was his service as a broadcaster, doing thousands of shows over 15 years where he informed people about religious issues, about international issues, national, state, local issues. I mean, he loved it. He loved bringing people in and hearing what they thought and letting them share their thoughts with a broader audience. And in government, I think he was really dedicated to that same thing. He really made no distinction between Eli Braude and Zumadog, the gadfly that I talked about. To him, they were equal, and I think both Eli and Zumadog knew that in Bill's eyes they were the same. And I think that is a really profound legacy, in some ways more important than any of the physical stuff that we do.
Now, Cindy described when LAX became part of the 11th District after the 2000 census, that working on the master plan through the way she described was that LAX hijacked her legislative time, especially that she had so little of it. Is that a fair assessment if there's something in your district that is so monumental, or however you want to describe it, that is entitled to that much of your time? One of the things that you mentioned to me was that when you first came on board the city, homelessness was not your passion issue, that it was Bill that brought you on board to that particular insight, that particular passion. So here you have homelessness that you have a very strong passion to do something about, and maybe not the greatest supply of patience to do it, and yet you have all these other little things around the corners that are pulling you away from that. And so how do you juggle all that? How do you give everything its proper place without losing sight of this is what's most meaningful to me? And what was the issue that you came in with feeling strongly about more when you went to work for Ruth Galanter?
Well, when I went to work for Ruth Galanter, environmental issues was probably what motivated me most. And when I took office, I think the issues that I articulated to my staff I wanted us to focus on were transportation, environment, and technology/jobs, which in my district are more or less the same at the moment with the emergence of Silicon Beach and stuff. It's not that I didn't have a passion for homelessness. I'd actually worked at a homeless shelter for a while on the East Coast and came very, very close to homelessness myself when I moved to California. I was heavily addicted to drugs. I've been sober 23 years now, but there were nights I slept on the beach. There were nights I slept in my car. I know and feel the issue very deeply, but when I got elected, it was not the crisis it is now. The issue in 2013 that voters talked to me about was traffic and development. Now, no matter where you go in my district, and I would say no matter where you go in the city, the issue every member of the council, every elected official is hearing about is homelessness. It has expanded exponentially everywhere, and worse in the city of Los Angeles for a number of legal reasons that have handcuffed the city. And since Mayor Garcetti took office 5 years ago, same time I did, the city and the county have actually housed more people than they ever have. Last year we housed 19,000 people. But even that is not enough to keep up with the inflow of people becoming homeless every year through mental health issues, through addiction issues, through being victims of domestic violence, through teenagers running away from home, from foster youth aging out of the system and having nowhere to go. Housing affordability, so many different reasons, and we're having an impossible time catching up, and the federal government is making it worse. They're cutting housing vouchers, they're cutting support for kids that stabilize families. It's horrible. And for me, not only do I feel it morally and passionately, but it is a life or death issue. I've had people die in front of my office in Westchester. 3 people within a 6-month period last year. I was at a press conference last week with Herb Wesson defending his proposal for a shelter in Koreatown, and I got a text from my police captain saying someone died in an encampment across the street from Broadway Elementary School. Last week, I got another text. Someone died at an encampment on 3rd and Rose in Venice. People are dying. And the number one issue I hear about from my constituents are encampments in their neighborhoods. LA Times has a front page story today about encampments in Council District 9 and Karen Price's district in downtown. And there are people living in front of people's businesses. Kids can't walk to school on sidewalks because we have shanties everywhere. They have to walk in the middle of the street in some places. It is the biggest issue in our city, and it has been the issue that has hijacked my time in office, and I've got no regrets about that because we have to step up. If you're not an elected official and this issue is not consuming your time and attention, something's wrong, because it touches every aspect of Los Angeles life, and we have to get beyond this. We absolutely have to, and it requires not one thing. It requires dozens of things, and we can't just pick one. We have to be doing them all. A different solution for veterans homelessness than there is for someone who's fled domestic violence, than there is someone who's suffering from mental illness. All different solutions. We got to do them all. And we can't keep saying, and this is where the impatience comes in, we can't keep saying what was said when I took office was, yep, permanent supportive housing is the answer. It is the answer, but it's the answer for a segment of the population, and it's an answer that isn't going to be provided for 3 to 5 years until they build the damn units. So what are we doing tonight? What are we doing tonight to get people off the streets? And for me, that's shared housing, it's reunification, it's the bridge housing, the shelters that Herb Wesson is proposing. We're doing one in Venice, I hope at the Metro Bus Yard. I mean, we have to do stuff today.
Do you think CD 11 is in a unique role to lead towards the bridge housing? I mean, have you taken a lesson or two from the blowback that Wesson's been getting in Koreatown as far as when you decided to announce the bus yard as a possible site. You know, there were complaints in Koreatown that Wesson didn't go to the community often enough or strongly enough, and so is that something that you are able to articulate better?
Yeah, I mean, I've gotten my butt kicked over the road stuff over the past couple of years, and so my staff and I have thought very deliberately about, you know, how you deal with controversial and necessary ideas. And you know, one of the road projects we did had remarkable outreach. It was 3 years worth of outreach and workshops at coffee shops and schools and stuff like that, but you never do enough. There's always someone who hasn't heard. You always have to do more. But we did learn a lot from Herb's experience in Koreatown, a lot. And as a result, the mayor and I did outreach. We actually asked people for suggestions of where we locate bridge housing in Venice. I have people recording video testimonials to show support for this, audio testimonials. We've been doing phone banking all week long. You know, we've got an actual field campaign. We're approaching this as a real issue to go out and talk to people. And what I'm finding is, one, my district is very different than Herb's. Herb's district, you know, folks are taking to the streets every weekend with picket signs. The demographics of my district are different. My district is, the way it protests is change.org petitions and lawsuits. And there will be some lawsuits. You know, there have been lawsuits over some of the proposed homeless housing we have proposed. And we're going out, and what I've found is people are so frustrated with encampments everywhere that they are objecting less to shelter than they are to housing. And that surprised me, because usually housing is an easier sell than shelter. And that's not the case. And I think that illustrates the scope of the problem in Los Angeles, that people are saying, I'd rather have shelter than encampments everywhere in Los Angeles. And I think that you asked, you know, what role my district has in being able to sort of lead or set an example. When we developed our comprehensive homelessness strategy, I've been around government long enough. I knew that if we didn't start moving right away, this damn thing was going to sit on a shelf and nothing would happen, So I went out and like a month later said, okay, here's a bunch of things we can do in my district. And I deliberately went first because I knew that if someone went first and took a few hits and survived and got stuff done, it would set a good example. And so we've been trying to do that. Others have jumped in. Now every council district is committed to an equal share of permanent housing. Every council district is now going to do the bridge housing, the emergency shelter. And the flip side is my district also has the ability to derail things. There's a lawsuit over homeless housing in my district. And the city has passed an ordinance to make it easier to build homeless housing faster. A group of folks has sued to stop that ordinance from going into effect. The irony is that it doesn't apply to the project in their neighborhood. The project in their neighborhood isn't using it. So they are literally slowing down homeless solutions in other neighborhoods. It's not in anybody's backyard is what it's become. And I think they're doing it to try to get the city to cave on the project in Venice so that they'll drop the lawsuit and the stuff can work elsewhere.
Yeah. I had a chance to watch a couple of the budget and finance meetings not too long ago, which of course you were part of that.
You need better hobbies.
And it was interesting to me that when Animal Services, when Brenda Barnett was before the budget and finance and was talking about, you know, the funding that they wanted to do this and that part of it had to do with allowing people to bring their pets with them into bridge housing. Because that was cited as a reason that a lot of people are resistant to getting out of the tents or getting out of the encampments wherever they happen to be. And I thought that and I figured, okay, that's something I never would have considered in a million years, that would make the difference between staying out or finding something a little more comfortable to be in if you couldn't have your pet with you. But it's obviously that important.
All the difference in the world. You know, in that clip that you showed, I talked about two things that I thought really defined Bill. One was his insistence on the reburial of the remains of the Gabrielino Indians. It was a huge passion for him. The other was that moment when he took the tour of Skid Row, and he got angry at the people giving the tour who said, "You need to put on gloves." I mean, and he got down on his knees, and as I said in that clip, he hugged people and held their hands and talked to them. And we're not going to solve this problem unless we actually talk to people. I need to talk to the people who live across the street from the proposed shelter and hear their concerns and how we can address them. And you have to listen to people who are homeless if you are trying to provide a solution to homelessness. The bureaucratic homelessness solutions that we have historically had are slow moving, and those of us who are blessed enough to have a roof over our heads very quickly describe people living on the streets as service resistant. We have services that are people resistant. And here's a story I hear a lot. Well, I drove by an encampment and I said to this guy, "Hey, I'll take you to a shelter." And he said no. So clearly he's service resistant. They want to be homeless. Why should we help them? Well, look at it from a different perspective. You're sitting there on a street. You've been homeless for a while. You have been approached by many people who claim they are going to help you. And they may have given you a $5 gift card for Starbucks and a list of phone numbers to call, and they've never come through and given you housing, ever. You have been screwed and burned and robbed by people, strangers. So when someone comes by that you don't know and makes an offer to you, you're kind of wary. Let's say you get past the trust issues. Then you listen to what they're offering you. From our perspective, we're offering someone a roof for the night. From their perspective, we are saying, would you please leave all of your friends and the people you know, you watch out for each other, your tribe, and come with me to a shelter for the night. By the way, you need to leave your pet here. By the way, you need to leave all your belongings here, except what you can fit in a backpack. And by the way, if you have a wife or a girlfriend or an opposite sex partner, they can't come with you because we segregate by gender. And then on top of it, and we're going to throw your ass out at 6 a.m. That's, for most people, not a particularly attractive option. And it's why we're doing the bridge housing proposal the way we are. It's been done in New York, San Diego, San Francisco. Not that it doesn't have its own problems, but you can be with your family members. You can bring your belongings. You can have a pet. We need to think about what are the barriers that cause people to make what we think is an illogical decision of staying on the street, when from their perspective, it's a perfectly logical reason. How do we make not being on the street more logical? And that, to me, is somewhat of a Bill Rosendahl legacy, is getting down on your knees and putting your arms around someone and listening to what the real issue is.
Joseph, you knew Bill professionally. You never really did know him as a friend or anything like that. But you did have a connection with him, though, professionally. And do you have any thoughts on that? Any final thoughts on that?
No, just he was really giving and really kind to me, and we did one Getty grant and then another Getty grant, and we did a couple of Warhols, and it was all because of Bill. I mean, those are testimonies to, I'm still getting money because of Bill. So even though he's not around to help me anymore, he prepared a way for me to get to some cash that I needed. So, yeah, I mean, ours was a professional relationship, but I kind of do think of him as a friend because he really did reach out and help when other people weren't so willing to do so. So I think that that was really important to me.
Okay. And before we open up to any questions out there, do you have any final thoughts or a closing statement on Bill Rosendahl, as what he meant to you, and do you have any of those what would Bill do moments in your in your daily life?
I have a lot of what would Bill do moments in my daily life, and I think my staff is getting frustrated because I'm having a lot more of them lately. Particularly with homelessness, I'm really sick of getting text messages that someone died on the streets. I'm really sick of hearing about a kid who was scared walking to school because there was someone loud and noisy outside their home. I mean, I can't tolerate that anymore. And government moves really slowly. And there are times when I know my staff would prefer and they would feel much more empowered if I let them do something. But just by the nature of government, something a staff member does, the call isn't going to get returned as quickly. The action isn't going to come as quickly. And so in the past couple of months in particular, my staff is busy trying to catch up with me because I'm calling a general manager or I'm calling an agency, and I'm just trying to get something done today. And boy, that is a Bill Rosendahl thing. Bill did that all the time. And it's annoying as hell as a staff member because you feel like this is my job, and next time I call, they won't return my call as quickly because clearly it's not important enough for the boss to call. But when you feel, I was a staff member for a long time. Everybody asked, what is the difference? And the difference is going from being a scrub nurse to being a surgeon. I knew the theater of operations, I knew the procedures, but man, it is just, the intensity of it is significantly different. And the weight of the decisions and the frustration with the inaction just weighs very, very, very differently. And I think the longer I serve in this and the more this crisis doesn't get solved, the more I just hear Bill Rosendahl in my head, and the more I just bring that spirit into the job. And having been on the other side of it as a staff member, I know what my staff is going through, but, deal with it.
Okay, at this time we will open up the floor to question and answer. Now, we do not have an extra microphone, so what you can do is you can, as loud as you can basically tell us what the question is. I'll repeat the question, and then it can be answered by whoever you wish. Yes? Joseph, can you comment briefly about Prop 6 that she was referring to? Because I'm not.
Well, I mean, it's like, I think all of these propositions are met with a certain amount of, in the early days, with closetedness. And it was a really big problem because people couldn't come out, and so then there were a few who had the courage to come out. But then later on, as that has changed over the years, then they've changed. The Briggs Initiative, I think, was a huge turning point here in California. I mean, after the Briggs Initiative, nothing was ever the same again. I mean, the Briggs Initiative really was basically saying that no teacher in any system in the United States should ever be a gay person. They shouldn't be around little kids. So that kind of was the way that it went. And it was really soundly resisted, and there was a really good campaign for it, but still, I feel like you're right that a lot of the people were afraid of coming out. They were afraid at that point, even still, to do that. Well, my 97-and-a-half-year-old friend, who I mentioned before, has never allowed me to say her last name in public because she's still afraid. And so I know what that looks like and feels like. So.
And something that you had mentioned to me when we had our chat is that, and because you haven't mentioned Japan, it suddenly made me think of it, is that you were talking about countries where the repression exists. And could you expand that? Could you go back to that for a little bit?
Well, no, I was just mentioning to you that there are only gay movements in countries where the repression of gay people has been profound. So if you go to places like France, where it's kind of don't ask, don't tell, there's not much of a movement there, per se. And in Japan, there's not really much of a gay movement. And it's because of the fact that it's not ever been against the law, except for a 10-year period between 1868 and 1888 or something like that. But, I mean, so it's a don't ask, don't tell kind of a country. And so as a result of that, there's never been a strong movement to fight it. Here in the United States, because it's been so repressed for so long, there's been a really fervent movement to oppose it. So.
Okay.
But the Japanese, I want to say to you, I lived there for 7 years of my adult life. There's no end to the cleverness of the way it is to live in that culture. I mean, I didn't see them when I first went there. There were braille streets that you could read with a cane that are all over. Bird chirps whenever you cross the street to make sure that non-hearing or hearing people but not sighted people could know when the light was going on. I mean, there's a million things that they do there that, and no one addresses you in Japan. I mean, my students now actually want to call me by my first name, which I don't allow. But it's really funny because in Japan, they always say sensei before they say your name. So it just seems to be much more reverent. So there are things I don't like about Japan. I'll be frank about that. But simultaneously, I share your admiration for a lot of the humanistic kinds of things that they do for people there.
Okay.
Well, thank you. For those who couldn't hear it, he and his colleague do events, public art events, and they do them throughout the city, and they're trying to find a way to use that as an opportunity to create jobs for people, which I think is absolutely phenomenal. I am a huge fan of public art. And we have in my district it was the first place in the city back when I was a staffer, and we now have more than one of them, where graffiti artists can come and they have a public place as a canvas. It's on Venice Beach, and now we have it on 3rd Street, where it's run by STP, which is Foundation from the Valley, and they bring in different crews every week to do stuff. It's phenomenal. Part of the reason it works is we went rogue and we just did it without going through the bureaucracy. The best advice I would give you, and happy to talk to you afterwards or sit down and meet sometime, is the same advice I tell deputy mayors. The mayor's office historically has 100 people in it, and the mayor meets with a lot of his mid-level staff maybe like a couple times a year, and so they're competing with the mayoral bureaucracy to get something done. What I tell them is find a council member who agrees with you, and then you have a champion to do something legislatively. I would find the same thing. You've got some great contacts with Jan and Felicia, but let's talk, and whether it's me or someone else on the council, if you get someone who can help push it from that perspective, it moves things a lot faster. And what you're talking about, both with public art and about creating employment opportunities, are things that are, at least with the body I serve with, sort of in the zeitgeist. So I think there's an opportunity to do something there. Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll have, I think we've got time to take one more. Gentleman right there. Okay. Oh, okay. Clark.
Sure. So the question he asked about was a story that was on the front page of the Los Angeles Times yesterday. It was posted on their website Friday afternoon, and it's about one of the many solutions to homelessness, and it's called shared housing. And it's an idea that has been championed for a while in Los Angeles by a group that's based on the West Side called SHARE, which stands for Self-Help and Recovery Exchange. And what they have done over the past several years is they've worked with an LAPD chaplain, 2 of them. One of them recently passed. His wife still does it, who would go out, and they had a particular gift to talk to people who were living on the streets. And if you go through the usual process, it can take 6 months to get a voucher, 6 months to find a place. They would say, hey, if you have some limited income stream, whether it's disability, SSI, or general relief or something, that can equate to $500 a month, I can get you a room tonight. And they have worked with property owners or landlords who need roommates or want roommates, and they match them up. Every building is a little bit different. Their model doesn't fit into the social service model. It's hard to make this fit with the federal guidelines for vouchers and the requirements for social service funding. So what I did was I gave them 50 grand, and I said, go out and do a pilot project in my district. You know, permanent supportive housing can cost $400,000 per unit. And what they did with $50,000 is they housed 24 people in 3 months. Is that still a viable option? Is it all working out in a year or two for these folks? We'll find out. But it's something that they have been doing for a while, and I think the city needs to look at and invest in more. As with any solution to homelessness, it doesn't work for everybody. I would be a horrible candidate for it because I'm not a good roommate, as my husband and son might tell you. I like having a lot of privacy, so it wouldn't work for me. But it does work for a lot of people. And what we've had for too long in the social service industry is we've had what I equate as the equivalent of religious wars, is everybody is so attached to their own solution that they invest in tearing down the competing solutions. And they're not competing solutions, they're complementary solutions. We need all of them. What's really remarkable about this story in the Times yesterday is that there's a couple in Venice, John Betts and Heidi Roberts, who I've worked with and worked at odds with over the years. And they've been very frustrated with how long it takes to house people. So they went out and they bought 2 fourplexes in Councilman Price's district in South Los Angeles, and they started working with Share and housing people from Venice. A lot of the people who are housed there know each other because they were living together in encampments. They've bought in not particularly expensive areas, so the amount of income they're getting from each person from the disability or SSI or whatever is enough to help them pay the mortgage. And then they're banking on the property appreciating. They own other properties as well. So it's a good investment for them. Probably not the most lucrative real estate investment they could make. I mean, it comes with a lot of heart. But we literally need both the big social service agency solutions and these quick, nimble things, and I'm just glad to see it. So I'm glad you read the story. Thank you.
Okay, and I think this is actually a good point to end our conversation. Thanks everyone for coming out, and especially my thanks to Dr. Joseph Hawkins of One Archive, and especially to Councilman Mike Bonin. I really appreciate your time, gentlemen. Thank you very, very much in giving us your experience and wisdom.